Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, and for the next couple of weeks, we are re-releasing some of our older episodes that we want to recirculate in our podcast feed. This week, we are re-releasing episode 49, previously titled Seismic Shifts in Grants. We host this episode with Desari Read, our Vice President of Grants Engagement and Management. We're going to talk about the grant writing process and what the future of grant writing looks like. Let's jump back in.
Desari, I'm excited to have you on this episode. We've had you as one of the original guests that we were going to have on the podcast going back almost a year now, and with all of your awesome work, it's just taken us this long to schedule it. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you this morning.
Thank you. You do keep me busy. That is true.
It's we were talking about everything you were doing last week, and just give some window of what it looked like last week in what you were trying to accomplish, which was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we were working Department of Energy grants on the battery manufacturing. We had multiple clients in different areas of interest that we were supporting, and these were large businesses. So these were nice sized contracts. So really, really important for us to deliver a good product and support them in what they were doing. None of the clients had experience with grants at all. It was a very new process to everybody. But because of the large dollar amount, a floor of $100 million, right, and then $100 million match, a one-to-one match, it's pretty tempting. So we had those clients and we were trying to give them the best support that we could, right? And so just coming into that last week before the due date on Friday, we had all of those grants due, and the budgets and the statement of work and the resumes and all the extra documents, plus a 50-page technical volume for each grant and a 20-page diversity, equity, and inclusion volume, which is really new. It's a new thing. So a lot of work and teamwork. A lot of people had to be on the team to make those things happen. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, let's, we're going to come back to process and some of the things that we see current in the federal market, and especially with these grants that we've been talking about. But before we do that, let's, why don't you talk about yourself and our relationship over the years, and how did you get here?
Yeah, well, it's a good story.
Good story.
Yeah. So about 2006, I started helping my dad write grants. He was a grant writer for about 40 years and very prolific, very successful. And he was working for the Navajo Nation at the time. And so there was a lot of grant work to be done. And so I started supporting him. And I was like his apprentice. Yeah. And it's kind of, that model is still such a great way to learn a trade. And so I worked with him, and we had a couple of really good, successful grants that won. And then he got connected with LSI, and so then a few years later, I did too. So then we started. Both of us were doing various grant assignments, just as consultants, and that was really good. And then in 2015. Go Utah, at the time was GoEd, and they had the PTAC contract, and they asked for some specific support with grant work and small businesses and for the state. And so that's where we kind of came in and really started working full time on grants, supporting the state of Utah for the most part. And there was one-offs, every once in a while with different clients, but mostly it was with that. And then in 2021, just, less than a year ago, we were able to sign a contract just for grants with the state of Utah. And so our work over the years really brought us to that point where they felt like they wanted us to be doing full-time work with them. And so that brought that contract about. So that's kind of my history with grant writing and with LSI.
Let's can we talk about your dad for a minute?
Sure.
What an amazing individual. So I'd known your dad for a lot of years, and as you said, he was part of our team for several years, and had a real talent for looking at the requirements of these grants and then building a strategy around it. And I've got some other questions for you, but will you just talk about your dad for a minute? What a great guy.
Yeah, I absolutely would love to. I think a lot of what I am, I owe to him in multiple areas, not just writing, but, he taught me how to golf. He taught me how to read really fast, speed reading. That was kind of a thing for him. He taught me how to write, how to be a good writer. And so we have, over the years, he supported me in lots of ways. I have memories of him on the bus with me going to high school music concerts where I was a vocalist. And, I was like a senior in high school and he'd be on the bus, because that's how supportive he was. So great father. As far as the talent, he was incredibly talented, and he worked for a school district in Washington that was a bilingual school district, and he was bilingual, and he worked so hard to support those programs that came out of the federal government. And so he had a lot of passion about grant writing and supporting underserved communities, all of that. And I think that is part of, rubbed off on me a little bit too. I like that part of it. And then the strategy piece of it, I think you hit the nail on the head there. He was a great strategist and taught me a lot about work plans and, how to turn objectives into actual activities and deliverables and those type of things. And I think that one of the things I notice the most when I go into doing these grants is that's where these entities need the most help, is figuring out, what their activities and their deliverables are going to be and how they're going to measure things and how they're going to show that they said that they did what they said they were going to do. And so I got that a lot from him and those strategies. So he was a pretty great guy.
He's a great.
Yeah. He was a great golfer too. So I used to go watch his tournaments when he was young.
Amazing. I really miss him. And what an incredible individual. One of the things that I really admired about him and his work was that he always approached these opportunities with the intent, we're going to win this. And if he didn't think he could win, he'd say, let's not do it. And I always admired that about him. We talk a lot about winning and having this attitude of winning, and your dad was so good at that. He just said, let's not do something if we don't have a high probability of win. And I think that's why he was so successful all of those years, is that he approached, you talked about his passion, and he approached all of these opportunities from a position, we're going to win this. Mm-hmm. We're going to do whatever is necessary to win. We're going to stay up, 5 straight nights. We're going to bring in the best subject matter experts. It's going to take effort and time and money and whatever it is, but we're going to win. And I think that while that is not a skill that is easily learned, it is so critical for our business and what we do, because it really is the heart of all of our business development.
Yeah, I agree. I love that you know that about him and that you're sharing that, because I always believe that we're going to win. I think that if we get to the point where we're going to write the grant, that we're good enough to win and we have the skills and we should win. And so I tell people, they're like, what do you think our odds are? And I'm always like, oh, we're going to win.
Going to win.
But I always think we're going to win. And most of the time we do.
We do.
And that is because there is some, it's called practicality with passion. You have to have both. You have to have that balance of knowing if this is a good opportunity, and then the passion that goes behind it to make it happen. So absolutely. Got that from him.
I remember your dad saying to me, hey, I think you were already working with us. I can't remember. Maybe you can remember the details of this, but I remember I'd worked a few projects with your dad, and I remember your dad saying, hey, I've got this daughter, and you really need to meet her. I can't remember. Were you working with your dad from the beginning as he joined LSI, or did he bring you in later? I can't remember the sequence of it.
And I don't know if I remember the sequence either, except that he had retired. He'd been in the Office of Sponsored Projects at the University of Northern Colorado. He'd been at several universities, Arizona State, Fresno State, as the head of their sponsored projects, which is basically the grant writing arm of the university. And he retired and moved to Utah. And that's really when I got involved, because I lived here. And then he was able to say, hey, can you help me with this? Come over and let's talk about it. And so I'm not sure exactly what the timing is on that. I think he was already involved with LSI.
I think so too. I think he had worked with us for a few years, and then the practice just kept growing, and he then brought you in. I think he had you doing some other things initially, but and then what has happened over the last 10 years has just been remarkable, that it really was this discipline of grant capture and proposal development really was always part of the LSI portfolio. And we'd always had these clients that would contract with us to help them build proposals for various public and private grants. But it was a tough business because typically the organizations that were bringing us in were nonprofits, education institutions that didn't have any money, right? And so they would say, this would change our organization if we could capture this funding, and this is so important to us, but we don't have any money to pay you. So, wow, how has that has really changed? I mean, could you just talk for a minute about the last decade? And I mean, we're going to talk a little about Build Back Better, IJA, and some of the other NSF, some of the things that are going on now, currently, but just really in the last 10 years, think about how different this practice, how different it was 10 years ago, and how it's evolved over the last several years.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It was very niche at the beginning, right? It was very limited. And companies that were large and had technology and R&D, they had in-house grant writers. And so, to offer it as a service, it had to be the right client and very niche. And then the small business grant piece is the same story, right? They don't have any money. They don't have expertise. They don't have business plans even written, that kind of, it's one guy and his best friend that start this company, right? They don't have the bandwidth to write or the technical ability. Right. And so, there had to be some sponsorship somewhere. And I think that's really, it started small like that, even though it was out there. And I think what really helped grow it, at least for LSI, was just the foresight of the state of Utah wanting to support small businesses and pay those costs. And so that really helped. But I think that the grant world itself has changed dramatically. And, we talked about all of, Department of Ed kind of stuff was big. And now, the DoD had lots of contract work, but now they're going towards grants, and then IIJA, which I know we're going to talk about that. But the dollar amounts is another thing that's changed. They used to be small. They used, 100,000 here or 100,000 there, and now 100 million. So
exactly.
it just brings a whole new crowd to the yard, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So yeah, but I think it's exponential growth, and I think we're just on the curve of that.
I think so too.
For LSI especially.
What I have noticed is that looking back over the last 30 years that I've had the company, and that, like I said, where we've always worked for these organizations, I can tell you that the organizations that were serious about the science of grant capture and proposal development, they would win. And the organizations that would try to do this organically, it was typically this mindset of the executive director or staff member who was already overworked, didn't have the bandwidth to do this, and didn't have the skills to do it either, would say, oh, this will be easy. This is 30 pages. I can write 30 pages over the weekend. I'm gonna just do that during the weekend. And they would then say, I can't believe we lost. And we saw that so many times. And even 10, 20 years ago, the organizations that were committed to this and that would invest in true grant capture, having interface with the customer, understanding what their needs are, educating the customer on the concept and the capabilities of the organization, and then taking all of that market intelligence and then incorporating that into the proposal itself. I mean, this was your dad's methodology and strategy, and this was why. We always would win, and why you have taken that legacy and continued to implement those processes and develop a high probability of win.
Yeah, I think that there is a science to it. And one of the things I often tell the client, they're like, well, what do you think? Can we do this? And my answer is usually, we get all the points, we check all the boxes, we get all the points, we win. It's a 3-step process. And so there's, following those RFPs is tricky and it's technical. And so writing it over the weekend, you're just not going to be able to check all those boxes. And often I will say something to the effect of, if you don't have me help you with this, then you might not win.
That's right.
But if you have me help you with this, then you'll get as many points as possible, and your likelihood of winning is much, much higher, because we make sure that every box gets checked. And so, that's the technical part of it. On the other side of that coin, though, is the storytelling piece. And that can't be underestimated. I always tell people that the reviewers will read the first page.
Yeah, right.
Then they will skip to the work plan, because they'll want to know if you know what you're doing. And then they'll look at the budget.
Cost.
And if all of those things come together and there was a compelling story, then they'll go back and read the rest of it. But you can get tossed out at every step. So first, at the introduction, you'll get tossed if it's boring and you don't have a story. And then you'll get tossed if your work plan doesn't look great, and you'll get tossed if your budget doesn't match up with your work plan. So the goal is to get them to read the whole document, but the first goal is to get them to read the first page and then go to the rest of it. So there is an element of storytelling that's creative and not necessarily technical, but it has to be coupled with that. So
exactly. So we've touched on this a bit, but let's just summarize what has happened, especially over the last 2 years. I mean, it was typically this science of grant capture and proposal development was, as we said, nonprofits, education institutes, some government entities. We've always been involved in SBIR and some small business grants. And then when COVID hit, everything changed. We saw this at a policy level in DC, where these organizations had a ton of money. They were being directed by the Congress and the White House to push this money to businesses, to institutions, to government entities as quickly as possible. All of the federal acquisition regulations just out irrelevant, because the mindset, unfortunately, of procurement in the last 30 years it has been a pendulum back and forth, but it was all federal acquisition, FAR-based contracting. Now you've got these organizations that are saying, we don't have time to do a FAR-based acquisition. We are going to push this funding and acquire commodities and services through grants. And so with the CARES Act and the initial stimulus funding that was released, there was $1 trillion that was pushed, for the most part, outside of federal acquisition regulations.
Yeah, I think that for decades, they were the gatekeepers of money. And you had to get through the gate.
That's right.
And you're absolutely right. When COVID hit, it flipped a switch of, we now invite you into this lobby and we need to give you money. So please tell us how we can do that and we'll give it to you. And that's really essentially the attitude shift was no longer, we're going to try everything we can to keep you from getting this money. And we've written this document so that you almost have no chance of getting this money. We are going to even talk to you ahead of time, and we're going to help you, and we're going to have seminars and webinars and anything we can do to get you to help to win this money. And so total paradigm shift at the federal level, I think, in the agencies. And it came from the congressional level too, but it's just a shift, a very, very seismic shift.
Well, and it was everything. It wasn't just the science base that historically was, the grant funding was going towards research, right? Primarily, or going through to social services, or it was not, we are going to buy software and we're going to do it through a grant. Typically, that was not the scope of most of these grant RFPs until COVID. And now what has happened is that the amount of grants the RFPs for grants has increased exponentially. There are every day, as you know, as you see this, thousands of RFPs being released for everything you can imagine.
Yeah, sometimes it scares me. In fact, when we were doing all of these Department of Energy battery manufacturing grants, I just kept praying that the next one wouldn't drop till the 1st of July. Please just don't let the next one drop yet, because the bandwidth, right? So I was blessed, and there wasn't nothing dropped in that time, but we're just going to do it again, and that's okay, because we're going to be better at it this time than we were last time. But you're absolutely right. It is just, and I think that it's indicative of supply chain too, the piece about what you said about products and services, and we can no longer, have all of these things waiting for these things. We have to execute immediately. And so it can't be, a long drawn out process. And these are typically, let's turn this around as fast as we can. So
I think what's been interesting being inside of a lot of the organizations, and listening to their challenges of bandwidth, where, as you said, a lot of these organizations, they would have a budget historically of maybe $4 or $5 million. Now they've got a $5 billion budget. And they don't have acquisition teams. They don't have buyers and contracted executives to release the acquisition, administer the contract on the back end. And so this has become an easy way to where they've got pressure from the Congress, pressure from the White House to implement these programs and spend this money as quickly as possible. It's become an easy method for a lot of these organizations to push this, and they take a template, and a lot of times it's I mean we've seen this template. It's it's the same for most of these organizations, which have just latched on to other federal organizations and said, this is what we're going to do, this is the format, this is what we're going to need from these proposers.
And I think it's kind of an experiment, right? What we're seeing, and I think that if they see the success of this experiment, what are the outcomes? Did we increase, the GNP? Did we increase the ability for companies to produce and all of those things? Did we see a jump in technology because of these grants? Then it will become the norm. And so I think it's a great experiment. So we'll see what happens.
We had no idea this was going to be where federal acquisition was going. I just always knew that this was an important element of our portfolio. And so when this happened, we were so well positioned to take this on. I mean, we had subject matter experts inside of all of DOD and the Fed Civ organizations. We had a rapid response where we were used to, and I mean, you had been doing this for your career, where you were used to seeing the grant format, which was very different from the FAR-based RFPs. And so, and frankly, we had won a lot of really great, at the time, some of the largest grants ever awarded out of Commerce, out of HHS, out of DOD. So we were so well positioned for this almost immediate transition from FAR-based acquisition to we're gonna acquire everything through grants. I mean, talk about that, and that not only were we prepared for it, then we had some of our longtime clients like Go Utah and a lot of the education institutions saying, "Oh my goodness, come take this over."
Yeah, I mean, I remember when COVID happened, and I remember everybody was scared for their jobs, right? Everybody was a little bit worried for their companies and their jobs and the things like that. And I remember looking at the CARES Act and the ARPA thing, and then later the IIJA, and thinking, oh, we're going to be busy.
Oh, right.
We don't have a lot to worry about, and we're really lucky that we don't have to worry like a lot of people did. But I think that the positioning was brilliant, I have to say, and you get all the credit for that, Sean. I think you really looked pretty brilliant, at that moment, because we were well positioned and well experienced, and you have a team of grant writers that is successful and experienced, and that is rare. It's rare. And you had already put that team into place. So I think that it really speaks well of LSI.
We had that foundation and we're so well prepared. And it's just starting. It's starting, as we've talked about on a lot of previous episodes, we've talked about within the organization, This $1.6 trillion of IIJA funding and all of the other fallout as a result of it, the infrastructure, the other acquisition that's going to go to support IIJA, which could be another trillion or more dollars, it is just starting to happen. We've seen broadband, we've seen the airport infrastructure, we've seen and it really started with Build Back Better, which we're going to talk about in a second, which I love. And, the big funding is just now trickling out. I think, fortunately, we have got this foundation to take on some of these commerce, transportation, EPA, energy RFPs as they drop.
Yeah, we're 100% positioned for that. I just don't know very many other entities. I don't know any really that are as positioned to support grant efforts by industry or state and local governments, especially. And I wrote a brief back in November when IIJA came out, talking about the lack of infrastructure within the states to accept the money.
Right.
And be able to push that out. And so it's, our job is to make this process easier for our clients. And so I think that we have a lot to give. We have a lot to offer, future clients and current clients. So yeah, it's a whole new game. And I like where we're sitting. I like our cards.
I do too. It's been interesting working with a lot of these government entities that are not business development oriented, that have never had to compete for funding before. So let's talk about Build Back Better. This is a great initiative that interestingly, although it was a fraction of the funding that ultimately became IIJA, it got a lot of press. Build Back Better. There was the White House, the Congress, the media really talked a lot about Build Back Better. That was you can talk to it. I think, was it $2 billion that went into Build Back Better, and IIJA's $1.6 trillion. So, but talk about Build Back Better, because it really became the model, the template for IIJA.
Well, I had a lot of good previous experience with the Economic Development Administration and the Department of Commerce, which is where Build Back Better pushed all the money to. And so, I'd written several successful grants through them and had a great working experience with the Denver regional office and even the national office. And so to me, that was the right place to start. So they're the right flagship for what we needed at the time. They were the right model, because they were already doing the work that needed to be done. It was just in a very small, narrow field. They were only helping distressed areas and rural areas. That was their mission. And then when COVID hit, they decided that everybody was now distressed. And so they could support everybody everywhere. And then they got, I think it was $3 billion. And that was a lot of money. A lot of money for them to push out. But they were used to doing the work for people and economic development. And really, that's what we needed at the time. So I think it was a great call to send the money their direction and for them to push out. And they're really good at working with the people and, the groups. And so it was good, but you're right. It's been dwarfed now, but they're the right model. That was the right model for.
Didn't you think it was interesting that even with Build Back Better, you're right, that it was so familiar to us. It was the Regional Innovation Cluster grants that we had worked 10 years ago, and they had taken our model around RIC and just cut and pasted and tailored it to Build Back Better. Now it has become, those RIC RFPs have really become the foundation for IIJA and some of the other stimulus funds.
Yeah, it's the best way to get money down to where it needs to be fastest. And I think that's really what we need.
So talk about Build Back Better, because I thought this was amazing work by our team, by the client, and it was not a slam dunk. I mean, I thought your passion, your commitment to winning this was key.
Well, I always say too that submitting the grant is the first deliverable. Winning is after that. And I always want to win, but submitting it is sometimes an act of will to get it actually submitted. And Build Back Better was it was interesting. And we're talking about the regional challenge, specifically the Build Back Better regional challenge, because there were 6 grant programs that came out, and we actually won a couple of those from the other smaller programs. But the regional challenge, they wanted to create these economic clusters, essentially, which Utah's already so good at, and we've have already had so much experience in that type of grant work. And so just pulling together a coalition, and usually we're in the manufacturing sector. We've done a lot of work in the manufacturing sector, but this was different because the state of Utah wanted the energy sector to go after this, and that included the communities that had been distressed through mine closures and coal, and so this was about taking the coal communities and transforming them to clean energy communities. And these communities are super proud of the way that they've supported the state and the region with energy for the last, century. And so we wanted to try to help take that to, you're still that important. It's just going to be a different kind of energy. And so with that, we have 7 partners, 3 universities, several communities, and then the Utah State Office of Energy Development was the lead. And so creating that process and bringing those people together, and that was part of our work. And it's always a team effort. Every grant is a team effort. But I really enjoyed that process and working with all of those teams. It was a lot. We ended up having to do, we won the phase 1, which was a planning grant essentially. And I think there were 569 applicants and 60 won the phase 1. So big reason to celebrate.
Yes. I mean, you're so humble about this. Desari. 600 applicants, and essentially 1 per state won.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was amazing.
And I will take a little credit right there. I'll say that it was my recommendation to the state of Utah that we choose 1 project. I just said, I do not believe that they will fund more than 1 project in the state of Utah. And it's important for the governor to not write 5 letters of support, but to write 1. So there's a clear vision from the state of Utah. So I did give that advice because that's just experience speaking. It's, not that I'm smarter than anybody else. It's just the experience is that that's what's going to happen.
It was the strategy. It was this upfront strategy. It really was.
Absolutely. So it doesn't mean that that's always going to be the correct strategy for the state, but I knew in this case that was going to be the best strategy. So the state vetted 21 different applications to decide on which one would go. And then they partnered some of those applications together and that seemed to fit together. And so that group became the coalition. But one of the feedback we've gotten from EDA is that what they wanted to have happen in the planning grant was for that coalition to become strong and become a team, and that they have seen that from the state of Utah. And they have not seen that from other states necessarily, or from other applicants. They have seen that it was really just one group that got a bunch of partners and wrote a grant, whereas this application from the state of Utah, they can tell it's a coalition and that people are working together and they're doing different things. And so that's really speaks to, I think, well it was written and how well it's been executed.
Absolutely.
So.
What I think is so remarkable about this win, you look at the other grants that were awarded, the other 59 grants that were awarded, and they were biotechnology, and there was medical ecosystems, and there was, just this mostly technology. And we won on a industry that's not very sexy, which is mining. You won this on mining, which I thought was just incredible. It was a testament of the strategy of a good story that was built around the overall strategy, and it's incredible. I tell people this all the time. This award was not some new technology, or it was mining. It was mining. So it was incredible. That was a huge win, and became really the basis for creating tools and templates around this rapid response for other ARPA, IIJA, and the ancillary grants to support it.
Yeah, I have a lot of, and LSI has a lot of tools for support, depending on the level of support that entities need. If they just want some guidance, we can do that, especially with EDA. If they want guidance with Department of Energy, the experiences that we've had, and we have a lot of guidance and a lot of tools that they can use, depending on how embedded they want us to become. And I think that's really critical business-wise, is to give multiple options. We can embed, we can do 100% of the work, well, with the support of the team, but we also can give less if that's what you need, So I think that's really important from a business standpoint.
So you mentioned briefly this work that we're doing with the state of Utah, and we've replicated this elsewhere, but I thought it was incredible that the state saw this opportunity that with some funding, they could pull in federal funds. And this really started in advance of COVID, that we were going to build a grant capture and proposal discipline dedicated to the state of Utah and their priorities.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of both in LSI and in the state. And I think that speaks to the relationship that LSI had with the state, that we could have those back and forth conversations. But the vision, right? There's been a vision along the way. And, I give a lot of credit to Corianne Edwards and her vision, and how she has taken that to the state as well, and her immense support. And so I think that people are joining the bandwagon. I think that, at first it might have seemed a little strange or a little different or a little difficult. And then people are seeing how it is really bringing money to the state. And I think replicating it in other states has also been a good experience. But it takes vision. It takes people with vision to see that that's something that can happen.
It has been a conduit. And this really is why Corianne, I believe, was so adamant that this be a key part of the state's economic development strategy, is that she understood if the state would invest a few $1 million, they could get a few $1 billion in return. The return on investment is exponential through this grant capture and proposal development. And you're right, we're now, while we've been doing this for a few entities over the last several years, now there's so much interest by states and municipalities. How would you live through the RFP? We've now have been implementing this concept for several years. I mean, it wasn't dedicated. It wasn't a dedicated contract, but was part of a previous contract that we had. How would you recommend that a state or municipality that sees this as an opportunity, that if they would carve out a few $1 million to go after these grants and dedicate funding and a commitment to capturing these funds, how would you give or recommend, give advice to organizations that have a need and desire to make this happen?
Well, a couple of things. I think first, it kind of has to start at the top. There has to be, again, that vision of this is a way that we can support our state. So I think there has to be a value. The top leaders need to have that desire and that value. I think that another big piece of it is economic development. The key people that need to be interested in this is the economic development people at the state level and at the local level, because really this is about making people's lives better. When it's distilled down to the lowest denominator, it needs to be about making people's lives better. And so money comes to companies, and companies hire people, and communities thrive, and then communities are better and people's lives are better. And that may be a Pollyanna way of looking at it, but I really believe that that's the way we do it. And some of that money comes through the government. So it's not all through business. It needs to come through the government too, but the government needs to have that same passion that it's all about making people's lives better down at the lowest level, at the one. And so how do we do that? We find ways to bring money into the state, even through the federal government, and we use that money that's available, and we make sure that we make people's lives better with it. So
I've been impressed with a lot of these organizations that, similar to the way the federal agencies have responded rapidly, a lot of the states and municipalities see that this is a compressed time frame, and they are working rapidly to put us on contract and get us up and going quickly. So, I mean, some of this, we've seen this awards by grant funding to capture grant funds. We've seen some sole source awards or compressed timeframes, and I think we'll see more of that as the big tranches of funding are pushed, especially out of Department of Transportation, Commerce, and Energy.
Yes. Yeah, I think we saw in the CARES Act that they gave each state $1 million each to help them capture more funding.
And we're seeing that with some of these other disciplines like broadband. Every state got a $5 million formula grant. They didn't have to compete for it. They got a $5 million formula grant. Now there is a NOFO around these larger $120 million grants each. So you're right. You're seeing some of this going back to the RIC concept. That was a common practice.
I think it's about infrastructure. The states, the local entities that are getting this money, and now this money that's being pushed to them, they don't have the infrastructure. And so they need money to develop that infrastructure. And LSI is primed to provide that infrastructure on a contract basis rather than hiring more people. You can bring LSI in a contract to give you that infrastructure rather than having to hire a group of people that you may not need later. So
I mean, if you're a state, a municipality, or an organization that, like a university or a nonprofit, that could benefit from these IIJ funds, reach out to us. We'll have links in the episode notes that you can connect with us. Do you have, Desari, when you look at a new project, and they're all so different, but do you have a thought process that you go about when you're evaluating a new opportunity?
Yeah, I do. I really, I mean, people call it shredding or vetting or, whatever the thing is. I look for some really key points that are going to catch people up. So for instance, if you have to have a memorandum of understanding with other entities, something needs to happen quickly. What kind of registrations do you need to have? That has to happen quickly. Who are your partners? What's your match? How are you going to provide a match? If you have to provide job impact, do you have industry partners who are going to support that? So there's a lot of things that I look at critically. So that's one part of it. The other part of it, that's the critical side of my brain. The other part of my brain is, what can I get excited about with this RFP? What is, and who is out there that really can get excited about that? Because I think you have to blend that. Otherwise it just becomes a rote thing. And I never want it to be that way for me. I want it to be more than that. And so first is the critical side, and then it's kind of the passionate side. So both of those things, and who can we support with this, and how can we help them, and what kind of service can we give them to make sure that they win this? So
I love it. So there's a lot of things that we didn't talk about. Maybe just as we wrap up, there's a common theme that I keep hearing from our clients is, oh my goodness, we have 5 days to respond, or we have 10 days to respond. We keep saying, no, this is the new standard, and you need to be prepared for it. You cannot wait for the RFP to drop to create a plan and have the capture piece done, have a lot of the strategy and the writing, so that when the RFP or the NOFO is released, that you are prepared to spend that 5 days tailoring what you've already worked to the specific requirements. But you better have a good plan in advance. I mean, talk to that for just a minute, because every day we're hearing from our clients who are saying to us, oh my goodness, we don't have 5 days. We can't pull this together in 5 days or 10 days, or even, 30 days now seems like it's an eternity to respond to some of these opportunities.
Yeah, well, a couple of examples. Well, and I think people too, they're like, this is perfect. This is perfect for us. This RFP was written for us. But we only have 5 days. And so there sometimes, this is my philosophy on KSL when we're buying used cars. Another one will come. Get ready for the next one. That's the best way to invest. However, we also can do quick turnarounds too. I met with an entity this morning, and I was I told him, I'm going to be very upfront with you, and I'm going to tell you what I think the no-goes are on this. And they responded back with the right answers. And I said, okay, it's 2 weeks. We'll do it. And so it really depends on the entity and how well prepped they are. The other example that I want to give is, yesterday I was in a meeting with what is becoming the Electric Vehicle Coalition of Utah, what they want to have happen with EVs. And that includes charging stations and other things that go along with that, but also workforce. So we're looking at trying to do a workforce grant, because the gap in the supply chain is quickly going to be maintenance for these EV vehicles and for the charging stations. And you can't eliminate the human piece of the equation and supply chain. And so this is, and Weber State has a great program already in force. They have a great program. So this is also part of the UReady. It was a piece of the UReady grant. And so we're talking about scaling that. It's a train the trainer program. But the grant hasn't dropped yet. We've been watching it, and it hasn't dropped yet. It's a Department of Energy, and it should drop next week, we think, but we thought it would drop on the 1st, but so it hasn't. They're busy there too, right? So we came away with some key things that need to happen in the couple of weeks before that grant drops. And those include strategies, work plans, start working on the budget. What things do you want to have happen? What's the mission? Who are the partners? Can we already start developing letters of support from the legislature and from the Clean Air Caucus, that kind of thing? What are the activities we can do before the grant drops so that we are primed and prepped when it drops, so that it's not an emergency? So I think there are ways LSI can work with both types of clients if the conditions are right, but so much better to have time.
and this is the standard, that you will have 5 days to respond. So you either need to be prepared to bring an army in to respond, or better have a solid capture plan, a lot of the writing done for the proposal in advance. Otherwise, you are not going to. I mean, it's the mindset of, well, it's 30 pages. It's only 30 pages. I can do that in a few days. And that's just a myth. A single person cannot write a 30-page proposal in a day. And that's what we see from a lot of the staff, a lot of the executive directors. Oh, I'll just do it. This is perfect for us. I'll make that happen. And then they either build a terrible product and lose, or they can't get it done and they're staying up all night trying to put it together, and it's a terrible product.
Yeah, either way is a loss. It's just, and I feel like one of the things too that is so great about LSI is that we build capacity.
Right.
It's not just about we're going to get this grant out the door, but we're going to build that capacity in that company, or in that local government, or in that university, so that they know how to handle the next time, and they can bring us in still to support, but they'll have more capacity, because this is the way it's going to be.
I'd like to do another episode around DEI. You had mentioned that briefly, and so many organizations, they'll get into this and they'll say, I don't even know where to start with DEI. And it is, remember, IIJA, the J is jobs, and the jobs are disenfranchised communities. And so that element of DEI in your proposals is so critical for you winning this. And I think we've got a really good approach to DEI. We'll schedule another episode to talk about that.
Yes, let's do that, because I think I could probably talk the whole time on DEI.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, tell me what you do when you're not capturing grants.
Oh gosh. I like golfing. I started golfing when I was 13. My dad was a big golfer, and so I like that a lot. The last week, all I could think about was, I can't wait till I can get up early and go hit some balls or something. I just couldn't do it the last week or two. I'm not very good, so but I really enjoy it. I took some private lessons last summer so I could get a little bit better. Good. And so anyway, I really enjoy that. My husband and I like to cook. That's like our goal when we retire, is to do a cooking school thing together.
I love it.
Yeah, we like food a lot. We like eating out and those type of things. And then I have my grandkids too. I have 7 beautiful grandkids and 1 on the way. And I love spending time with them. I like taking them to Disneyland or Disney World or something like that too. So that's one of my other things I like to do. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great. This has been a lot of fun, and I think we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. We'll schedule another couple of episodes to take on some of these elements of grant capture and proposal development. So thanks for all you do, and this was great. You did amazing.
Thanks. Can't wait for part 2.
Okay, see ya. Take care.
Bye-bye.